Sarah moves through her house like a ghost, the silence of her father's absence pressing down on her. The walls, once filled with laughter and warmth, now seem hollow. Each room feels like a reminder of what's been lost. The kitchen, the living room, everything is the same, yet everything is different. Her father is gone, and with him, the life she once knew. The grief is heavy, like a weight that's always there, but it's a quiet, gnawing pain. It's the kind of grief that seeps into the cracks of her daily routine, leaving everything feeling off. Sarah forces herself to move through each day, but it's as if she's walking through fog. Nothing feels real. The world around her keeps moving, but she's stuck, unable to escape the quiet ache inside. Rocky, her father's dog, is the only one who understands. Untrained, rough but loyal, he stays close, sensing her sadness, offering quiet companionship. Every time Sarah feels the weight of her grief, Rocky is there, a comforting presence in a world that no longer feels safe. Their bond is simple, unspoken. Through the years of her father's illness, they've grown close. Now, with her father gone, Rocky remains, a steady source of solace, his presence a quiet comfort in the midst of her sorrow. Rocky's behavior is getting stranger by the day. Sarah notices how the dog tugs at her sleeve, his leash tight in his teeth as he pulls her toward the street. He barks constantly, not in his usual playful way, but with urgency, as if trying to tell her something important. First, Sarah brushes it off, thinking he's just restless. But when Rocky drags her down a side street she's never noticed before, her curiosity stirs. "Rocky, what is it?" she mutters, feeling a sudden twinge of unease. His barking grows louder, almost frantic, and his eyes dart around, scanning the street as if watching something only he can see. Sarah feels a pang of discomfort. She's always trusted Rocky, but now, something feels off. She looks around, wondering if she should turn back, but the dog seems intent on leading her. The pull is stronger now, as if he's trying to tell her that something is wrong. Her thoughts race. What is it? What's going on with him? Why is he acting like this? Still, she can't help but follow, feeling both protective of Rocky and disturbed by the way he's acting. They turn down a narrow, unfamiliar street. It's nothing like the ones Sarah usually walks down. This area feels abandoned. The buildings here are run down, their windows boarded up, the sidewalks cracked and uneven. Vacant lots stretch endlessly, overgrown with weeds and dirt. The air smells of neglect, of years left to rot. The further they walk, the more the sense of discomfort sinks in. The quiet feels heavy, almost suffocating, as if the whole world has stopped here. No cars pass by, no people linger on the streets. Everything is frozen in time. Sarah's chest tightens. This isn't a place she's ever been, and she can feel her heartbeat quickening. She should turn around, head back to the safety of her familiar streets. But something, maybe the desperation in Rocky's actions, keeps her moving forward. What could be so important here? What could he be sensing that she can't? As Sarah walks deeper into the area, her nerves only grow. The silence presses in on her, thick and unnerving. There are no birds, no voices, not even the sound of the wind stirring the leaves. All she can hear are the sound of her own footsteps, crunching against the cracked pavement, and the low growls of Rocky as he trots beside her. His growls are soft but persistent, an undercurrent of unease that mirrors Sarah's own growing dread. She looks around, her gaze flicking from one shadowed building to another. The streets feel like they're closing in around her, as though the walls are leaning in, watching her every move. The shadows grow longer, darker, as the fading light from the afternoon sun seems to vanish into the oppressive stillness. A cold shiver runs down her spine. There's something wrong here. She can feel it in her bones. It's as if she's stepped into a place forgotten by time. A place where no one goes, where nothing moves. A place that doesn't belong in the world she knows. Up ahead, a structure looms in the distance. A warehouse, its hulking frame casting a shadow over the street. It's like something from a different time, a relic left behind when the world moved on. The building stands in stark contrast to the untouched world around it. Its paint chipped and peeling, its windows cracked and dark. Sarah's heart beats faster. There's a foreboding aura around the warehouse that makes the hairs on her neck stand on end. The place feels like it's been forgotten for years, abandoned to time, and yet, it doesn't feel empty. Something about it doesn't sit right with her. Rocky stops abruptly, his body stiff with tension. He stands still, staring at the door, his growls intensifying. He seems to sense something she doesn't. A chill crawls up Sarah's spine, and she hesitates, looking back the way they came. The quiet street, the silent buildings, they all seem so far away now. But her curiosity pushes her forward. "Stay close, Rocky," she whispers, her voice barely audible. She doesn't know why, but she feels an urge to step closer to the door. Something inside her whispers that there's something here, something important, something she needs to see. As Sarah steps closer to the entrance, the unease in her chest grows heavier. The air is thick, as if the building itself is holding its breath. She pauses, standing at the foot of the door. The silence is unnerving. There are no sounds, no whispers, just an overwhelming quiet that fills her ears. The shadows around the warehouse seem deeper than they should be. They cling to the corners of the building like a dark, suffocating presence. The light from the fading sun does little to pierce the gloom that surrounds them. Everything feels off. Her breath catches in her throat. Something about this place feels dangerous. Her instincts scream at her to turn back. But she can't. She can't explain it, but something about this place is drawing her in. The mystery calls to her, even as the warning bells in her mind grow louder. Without warning, Rocky stops. His body goes rigid, and his growl deepens into something more menacing. He looks up at Sarah, his eyes locked on something inside the warehouse. The tension in the air is unbearable. The low growl vibrates in Sarah's chest, as if the dog is speaking to her, warning her of something she can't see. She feels the hairs on her neck stand up. What is it that Rocky is so afraid of? She takes a slow, cautious step forward, but Rocky doesn't budge. His eyes are locked on the door, his growl soft but relentless. She can see the fear in his eyes, the way his stance is protective. He's not just scared, he's warning her. The growl continues, louder now, shaking Sarah to her core. Rocky's body remains stiff, his muscles taut, as if ready to spring at whatever threat lies ahead. The silence presses in around them, and Sarah feels her heart race, her pulse thundering in her ears. For a long moment, she stands frozen, torn between her growing fear and the need to understand what lies behind that door. Rocky's warning is impossible to ignore, yet the pull of the unknown is too strong. With a deep breath, she steels herself. The need to uncover the truth outweighs her fear. She steps forward, the door creaking slightly under her weight as she moves closer to the unknown. Sarah stepped into the warehouse, and the heavy door creaked shut behind her, sealing them inside. The air was cold, thick with the smell of rust and dust. Her breath came out in small puffs as the darkness seemed to swallow her whole. The sound of her footsteps echoed unnervingly in the empty space, amplifying the silence. It felt like she was walking into the unknown, each step more uncertain than the last. The shadows stretched endlessly, and the vastness of the warehouse felt suffocating, as though it was alive, watching her. Rocky moved ahead, his body tense, tail low. He was quick, but his steps lacked the confidence they usually had. Sarah tried to follow, but the maze of crates and old machinery made it impossible to find a clear path. The dust on everything showed how long this place had been abandoned. The further they moved, the more Sarah's unease grew. The silence seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on her chest. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of why she felt so out of place in this abandoned building. The silence was unbearable, and with it came a growing sense of isolation. It felt as though the warehouse was closing in around her, the shadows growing thicker, darker. She paused, straining to hear anything at all. A soft scuffing sound? Or was it just her mind playing tricks on her? Her heart thudded in her chest. She tried to shake the feeling, but it only intensified, making her feel as if something unseen was watching her every move. Every creak of the beams, every flicker of movement in the dark only made Sarah more anxious. Rocky's growl rumbled low in his chest, and he looked over his shoulder, his eyes wide with unease. Sarah's pulse quickened. She tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself it was nothing, but every instinct told her something wasn't right. The warehouse felt alive in a way that made her skin crawl. At the end of a narrow corridor, Sarah's eyes caught sight of a door. It was old, warped with age, and scratched, as if something had tried to break through. Rocky suddenly froze, his body stiff, his nose twitching as he sniffed around it. Sarah's gut twisted. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. Despite the fear crawling up her spine, she was drawn to the door, unable to resist. The sense of dread intensified as she reached for the handle. Sarah's fingers trembled as she gripped the cold handle. The atmosphere around her felt heavier, suffocating. Rocky's low growl vibrated in her chest, his unease palpable. Her breath quickened, but she couldn't move. Her mind raced between curiosity and fear. She should turn back, she thought, but something kept her rooted to the spot. The locked door was a barrier, but it also felt like a promise of answers. Answers she wasn't sure she was ready for. Suddenly, a loud scraping sound echoed through the warehouse, followed by faint whispering voices that seemed to come from nowhere. The noise sent a jolt of panic through Sarah. The whispers grew louder, but every time she turned to face the sound, it was gone. It was as though the dark itself was alive, moving around her, playing tricks on her mind. The scraping continued, harsh and unnerving, but there was no source she could find. Fear gripped Sarah's chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. Her heart raced, her breath shallow. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to leave, but her legs wouldn't move. The mystery of what lay behind the door was stronger than her fear. The more she tried to calm herself, the more her thoughts spun into chaos. The feeling of being watched, the noise, the sense of something waiting. It was too much. She had to know. She had to keep going. With trembling hands, Sarah turned the handle. The door creaked loudly as it opened, the sound echoing in the vast emptiness. A wave of cold air rushed out, sending a shiver through her. The light from her phone cast long shadows into the room beyond. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer, the beam of light flickering across the room, revealing nothing but darkness. As the door swung wider, Sarah caught a glimpse of something in the far corner. A figure, standing still, shrouded in the dim light. Her heart stopped. She couldn't make out who or what it was, but the presence felt suffocating, like a weight pressing down on her chest. She took a hesitant step forward, her breath caught in her throat, unsure if she was ready to face what waited inside. Sarah's fingers trembled as she stepped deeper into the room, her phone's light the only thing cutting through the oppressive darkness. The silence was deafening, a heavy weight pressing on her chest. Each breath felt like a struggle, like the air itself was thick with secrets. She moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the room, searching for something, anything, that could explain the growing unease settling in her bones. Her foot brushed against something. She glanced down to see a box, tucked away in the far corner, its edges covered in a thick layer of dust. Her heart skipped as she knelt down, brushing the dust away to reveal the contents. Inside, there were old photographs, pictures of her father. But these weren't the happy memories she'd always known. These were different. In them, her father stood in unfamiliar places, with strangers she didn't recognize. The smile he wore wasn't the one she remembered. It was colder, harder, a shadow of someone she didn't know. Her fingers brushed the edge of an old journal hidden beneath the photographs. Sarah hesitated for a moment before carefully opening it. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but legible. As she read the entries, her heart began to race. Each word seemed to pull her deeper into a world she didn't understand. The journal spoke of secret meetings, locations she didn't recognize, and cryptic mentions of something dark. The more she read, the more the words seemed to form a pattern that pointed to a life her father had lived outside of her knowledge. A life filled with danger, secrets, and perhaps even crime. Her mind couldn't process it at first. This wasn't the man who had raised her. This wasn't the father who'd tucked her into bed every night, who'd been her protector, her hero. Was he leading a double life? What was the truth? The room seemed to close in on Sarah, the weight of the journal heavy in her hands. It felt suffocating, like the walls themselves were pressing down on her. She couldn't breathe. Her thoughts spiraled, each one contradicting the last. How could the father she knew, the man she loved, be part of something like this? The discovery felt like a betrayal, as if the foundation of her entire life had crumbled beneath her. The photographs, the journal, they were pieces of a puzzle she couldn't put together, a puzzle that shattered her sense of self. The air felt thick, suffocating, as though the room was a tomb, one that had been sealed for far too long, only now opening to reveal secrets that had been buried. Could she ever see her father the same way again? Suddenly, Rocky's low growl cut through the silence. The dog had been eerily calm until now, but his body was rigid, his ears pricked up. His growl turned into a sharp bark, echoing off the walls, as if warning her of something just out of reach. Sarah froze, her body tense, every instinct telling her to run. The unease that had been gnawing at her grew stronger, a cold chill settling into her bones. Something was coming. She couldn't explain it, but the air had shifted. Rocky's frantic barking made her pulse race, the dread deepening. Her heart thudded against her chest. Whatever was about to happen, she wasn't prepared for it. Out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw it. A shifting movement, something or someone, coming out of the darkness. Her breath caught in her throat, and her heart slammed against her ribs. A figure emerged slowly, tall, ominous, their face hidden in shadow. Every step they took felt deliberate, as if they were in complete control of the situation, as if they knew exactly what would happen next. The room seemed to shrink around her, the air thick with an unknown presence. Her body screamed at her to run, but her feet remained frozen to the ground. The figure didn't speak, didn't move any faster, but every step they took felt like a countdown, like something dangerous was about to happen. The figure finally stepped into the dim light, but the darkness still clung to their features. Sarah could make out nothing but the outline of their form, tall, broad, but impossible to identify. Her mind raced, but it couldn't catch up. Who was this person? What did they want with her? What was their connection to her father's hidden life? Rocky's barking continued, but the figure didn't react. They didn't flinch, didn't seem to care. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Sarah's breath came in short gasps, her body trembling. She wanted to say something, demand answers, but her voice wouldn't come. It was like the air had been stolen from her lungs. Her mind spun in circles, each thought crashing into the next, none of them making sense. Who was this, and why was everything about her father so shrouded in mystery? As the figure stood there, unmoving, Sarah felt the weight of everything crash down on her. The grief she had carried for so long, the grief of losing her father, felt insignificant now. It was replaced by something far worse. Betrayal. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, had kept secrets from her, and now those secrets were tearing her apart. She closed her eyes for a moment, her mind flooding with memories of him, the father who had always been there, who had guided her through life. But now those memories felt like lies. The truth she had uncovered was a shadow over everything she had believed in. Her chest tightened as she struggled to breathe, the realization settling in like a stone in her stomach. The emotions came crashing in, a wave of grief, confusion, and raw anger. How could he have done this to her? How could he have lived a life so different from the one she knew? The betrayal hit her harder than any loss. She couldn't make sense of it, couldn't find a way to reconcile the two versions of her father. The love she had for him now felt hollow, tainted by the darkness she had uncovered. She felt hollow, like a part of her had been ripped away. The truth was a weight she couldn't carry, and as it settled deeper into her soul, it left her broken. The figure before her seemed to be the embodiment of everything she had lost. As Sarah stood in the darkened room, the crushing weight of everything she had just discovered became unbearable. Her father, the man she had mourned, the man she had trusted, was never the person she thought he was. She wasn't just grieving for him anymore. She was grieving the loss of herself, the loss of everything she had believed to be true. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of confusion and anger, the emotions overwhelming her. The grief she had thought she had processed was now a deeper, more painful ache. And the room, this prison of truth, was where she would have to confront it all. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted through the darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest, the heavy weight of the recent discovery pressing on her every step. The warehouse had seemed like a place of answers, but now it was the epicenter of all her confusion. Rocky, always by her side, led the way, his body low to the ground, darting ahead with purpose. The fear in Sarah's chest began to tighten, but the dog's presence was a small comfort. The harsh reality of what she had just unearthed seemed to cling to her like a heavy fog. She had come searching for the truth about her father, but what she found shattered everything she thought she knew about him. And now she was running. The warehouse door slammed shut behind her with a heavy thud as she burst out into the cold night air. The streets stretched before her, empty and desolate. Sarah risked a glance over her shoulder. The shadowy figure that had watched her from the doorway stood still, unmoving, an ominous silhouette against the darkness. The air was thick with tension, but the figure did not follow. Her breath came in shallow bursts, each step pulling her farther away from the nightmare she had just uncovered. The quiet streets felt endless, as if the world around her had shifted, leaving her adrift in a new, frightening reality. Back at home, the quiet was deafening. Sarah stood in the doorway of her house, the silence pressing against her like an unwanted weight. The walls, once familiar and comforting, now felt cold, almost suffocating. She closed the door behind her, the sound of it echoing through the empty house. Her thoughts swirled, and the truth of what she had just learned seemed to hit her all over again. The father she had loved, the one who had raised her, was not who she thought he was. She sank into the nearest chair, the journal and photographs from the warehouse still clutched in her hands. The images of her father in strange, unfamiliar places, with people she couldn't recognize, played over and over in her mind. Each one felt like a punch to the gut, tearing away at the memories she had once cherished. The truth was unbearable. She had trusted him, believed in him, but now all of that seemed like a lie. As she sat there, the grief she once felt for his loss took on a new form, bitterness and betrayal. How could she have missed this? Had she been blind to his darkness all these years, or had she simply been too naive to understand what he was hiding? She ran her fingers over the journal, the cryptic entries haunting her with every word. The father she had known, the man she thought she understood, now seemed like a stranger. The weight of the discovery was almost too much to bear. She had so many questions. Who was he really? Why had he kept this from her? And more than anything, why did he choose to keep this hidden life, this dark secret, from the very person who should have known him best? Days passed in a blur, the world around Sarah moving in slow motion. The discovery still haunted her, a constant presence that clouded her every thought. She moved through life like a ghost, the weight of her father's secrets pressing down on her with each passing moment. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was a deep, aching sorrow laced with anger, confusion, and betrayal. Through it all, Rocky remained by her side. His presence was a steady reminder of the loyalty and love that still existed, even in the midst of such turmoil. Sarah would find herself looking down at him in the quiet moments, finding a small measure of comfort in the simplicity of his companionship. Gradually, the fog began to lift, but the journey was far from easy. Sarah realized that while she could never fully understand her father's life or his choices, she didn't have to let them define her. She could choose to move forward, to find a way to live with the truth she had uncovered. His secrets might have been buried deep, but she didn't have to carry the weight of them alone. It wasn't about forgetting the man she had loved, but about accepting that he, too, was flawed. The love she had for him was real, but it was also imperfect. The man she thought she knew could not be the same as the one in the photographs in the journal. But somehow, she had to find a way to reconcile these two versions of him, her father and the stranger. With each passing day, Sarah found herself growing stronger. It was not a quick or easy transformation, and the emotional toll was still heavy, but there was a slow, steady change in her. She stopped seeing her father through the idealized lens she had used for so long. The pedestal she had placed him on began to crumble, replaced by the complex reality of who he had been. Her relationship with him, once built on unshakable trust, was now a delicate balance between love and the painful truth of his past. The anger and confusion she felt were still there, but they no longer consumed her. Sarah was learning to live with both the love she had for him and the betrayal that came with the discovery. It wasn't easy, but she understood that healing didn't mean forgetting. And through it all, Rocky was by her side, a silent witness to the change. He, too, had lost something, the man who had once been his protector, but together they found a way to move forward step by step. In the quiet of her home, Sarah sat alone, reflecting on everything she had learned. The grief of losing her father hadn't gone away, but it had become something different, more complicated, more layered. She thought of him, the man who had been both a protector and a mystery, and the woman she had become in the wake of his secrets. Rocky lay at her feet, his steady presence offering her a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was a space for healing, for understanding, for moving forward. Sarah knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that it was hers to walk. She didn't have all the answers. She might never fully understand her father's choices, but she had the strength to keep going. The lessons of her past were part of her, and with them, she would forge a future that was hers to create. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft light over the room. Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her, quiet and steady. She was ready to face what came next, knowing that with each passing day, she was healing.